Hi, everybody. Welcome to CloudPoint's recorded presentation for attribute rules, specifically in NG911. I hope that you are doing well and that you will enjoy what we have to say. We love these rules. We've used them a lot, and we're excited to share them with you. My name is Erin Strickler. I'm the Director of Data Services here at CloudPoint. I've been here about 3 years. One of the first jobs that was handed to me was a 911 project. So they have spanned my time here. We've learned a lot. We've grown a lot in those 3 years. And most of that is due to about 6 months ago, Hunter showing up and me saying, I need help. I have this idea and I can't do it. So Hunter, you want to tell us a little bit about it from your perspective?
Yes. Hello, everyone. I'm Hunter Ray. I am the GIS analyst here at CloudPoint. Like Erin said, I joined the team about, I guess, almost 8 months ago. So yes, early on when I joined, we started talking about current workflows, multi-user editing, and I was thinking, maybe we could use this new branched versioning workflow since we already have ArcGIS Enterprise set up. And about 6 months later, here we are giving a presentation on it. So we learned a lot. It was frustrating. It was exciting. It's super rewarding. The team that's working on this NG911 stuff loves it compared to the older workflows, ArcMap, and some of the other stuff. So as we go through today, you'll see kind of a glimpse of what we're doing, and hopefully you'll come away with some ideas for your own workflows, and know that we're always here to provide any more insight you may need.
Yeah. And so with that, we've worked on probably a dozen addressing 911 projects. 7 of them have specifically been helping Illinois PSAPs going from their local data schema to the NG911 data schema, which every state's a little bit different, but they're all based on NENA. So everything that we share here will be applicable to Wisconsin standards too. So I just wanted to start with what exactly attribute rules are. And this is sort of stolen from Esri's definition. User-defined rules that can be used for 3 things: to automatically populate attributes, to restrict invalid edits while you're editing, and to perform quality assurance checks to make sure that when we're making edits, if there's errors, that we catch them right away. What they don't really explain in this definition is that you need arcade. You use arcade scripting language, which is, again, where Hunter comes in. You have to, those rules are all written in arcade. And then the 3 types of rules, 3/4 types of rules. We've got calculation rules, and those are both, can be intermediate, immediate, and batch calculation. And then constraint rules, which help us restrict those edits, and validation rules, which perform those quality assurance checks. So you might say, hey, Erin, I already do all these things and I don't use attribute rules. And I would say that's how we started too 3 years ago. I was in ArcMap and using Attribute Assistant, Data Reviewer, and Topology. And those do fulfill some of those roles. So Attribute Assistant, you obviously can automatically populate attributes. With Topology, you can restrict edits and perform quality assurance checks, although those are just on your boundaries, polygons. And then Data Reviewer does help you perform quality assurance checks. And then I moved to using both of those in ArcGIS Pro, which meant I had to get away from Attribute Assistant and move to Attribute Rules, which is what it's called in Pro. And the nice thing about that is it does all 3 of those things, the definition that we started with. And that's what makes them so powerful. So back to Data Reviewer, if you've used it before, it provides a static layer. So you write your rules, which for me was super useful because I didn't know arcade, and I could use drop downs to make those rules, and it would spit out a layer of everywhere that those were wrong. The problem with that is it's static. So I would make a change. I would tell the Data Reviewer layer that I made the change, but there was nothing there to confirm that I did that correctly. except starting a new reviewer session. And if you've done it, you know what I'm talking about, and it's not a lot of fun. But topology, if you've used that, is dynamic. You make a change, you run the validation, and you can see immediately if there is, if you've made it worse or made it better. And that's what attribute rules bring to a data reviewer type workflow, where you can immediately see if you've made a positive change or a negative change, and correct those right away. So right now we're using both of those because attribute rules are for attributes. We're using topology for our polygons, and that's how we're getting projects from the beginning to the end, and even maintaining into the future. For some of our clients, we are maintaining their data for them, and these rules also come in handy there. So there's 4 types of rules we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about the first 2, and then Hunter's going to show a demo, and then we'll talk about the last 2. So we talked about automatically populating these attributes. So what does that look like in specifically NG911? So for road center lines, you can calculate the global ID. You know, you've got 3 pieces to that ID. The middle one's changing for each road center line. You can use a combination of things to get that to calculate, and Hunter's going to show us what that one looks like. Street fields to legacy fields. So if you make a road name change, if you had Main Street and it should have been South Main Street, there's a chance you have to change that in 4 different spots: in the street name field itself, in the legacy field, in the full street name field, and in the abbreviated street name field. And obviously that takes time and introduces a lot of places where you can have an error. So with attribute rules, you can change that in 1 spot and have it populate in all 4 and be done with it. Another example might be postal code to postal community. I know that doesn't work everywhere, but if you have a one-to-one relationship between those 2, you could just populate one and automatically populate the other. It's similar for the address points. Everything above you can make happen there, but then another one we're going to show you how to write is the latitude, longitude. So we can get it to calculate as soon as you create one, but you can also get it to update as you move that point. So you never have to wonder if that lat long is up to date because you're forcing it to be up to date. We don't have any set up on boundaries, but you certainly could, and a global ID would be one of those where you could do that. So these rules have what's called a trigger. When does it fire? And so there's 3 different options: insert, update, and delete. Insert is when you create a new feature. Update is when you make an update either to the geometry or to an attribute. And then delete is something we don't use either, but it would be something like if you deleted a road and you wanted to delete all the related address points. Obviously not something we would do in this workflow, but that's what it can be used for. Versions that you need. So this can be done for almost anybody. If you have access to Pro, I say 2.3 plus, but you really should just be using 2.7. There's no reason to start at 2.3. And then you can do all these in a local file geodatabase. However, one of the problems is that once you create an attribute rule on a feature class, you can no longer access it in ArcMap. I did this dance for a long time, and it's frustrating. You can't remove those rules, but it's a pain. So the sooner you can get all your workflows to Pro, the better. For one, that's where Esri's putting all their time and effort, but 2, it'll make things simpler for you. Constraint is another one that we don't use frequently, but that is how you can restrict invalid edits. So for road center lines, you could use it to make sure none of your mandatory fields are null. You could restrict the postal codes that are allowed to those within your county, or maybe restrict allowable speed limits. Same thing with address points, with an addition of sort of a cool feature where you could force an address point to be placed within a building footprint. If you knew your building footprints were up to date and you wanted to make sure that every address point you created fell within one, you could force that to happen. And those are same triggers: insert, update, and delete. similar to what you need there. ArcGIS Pro, again, I would just say do 2.7. And then depending on what you wanted, you may need an enterprise geodatabase. Also no longer accessible in ArcMap. So with that, Hunter's gonna put some flesh on this so we can see it in action.
Yeah, so that's, the best way to kind of understand how all this works is to see it in action. So we're just going to start at the basic level of the file geodatabase with some calculation or constraint rules placed on it. So since we're talking about 911 data, we have this kind of mock data set here, some address points and some road center lines. So I've already kind of gone into the address points layer, and you can see it over here. We have just these two layers, but
hey, so I can't see your screen.
What?
I can see us.
Oh.
Sorry, I kept waiting. I thought maybe you weren't doing that on purpose yet, so that's why I didn't interrupt right away.
Can you see it now?
Yep.
Okay, so should we just start over and we can crop this out?
Yeah. I'd say we just start with you and your demo. We'll cut out the middle.
Okay, so for the demonstration here, I've got an ArcGIS Pro document open. I've added in a file geodatabase that is local, so that's just over here using the geodatabase, and we've got some layers, address points and road center lines, and I've just added those to this map over here. So this is kind of the basic setup. You have a file geodatabase and you want to just use maybe some calculation or constraint rules. So if we go ahead and open the attribute rules pane for the address point layer, you can see it's up here, and we click attribute rules, and you can see I've already, for the sake of time, preloaded some attribute rules to onto this address points layer. So again, because it's a file geodatabase, we can only use calculation or constraint rules, but for the demo, we'll just look at some calculation rules. So some common things that any 911 data set is going to have would be something like using a calculation rule to populate a legacy field based on one of the newer next-gen 911 fields. So for this case, if I go ahead and open this expression, you can kind of take a look at the arcade. It may be a lot, it's maybe confusing, but basically what we're doing is we are taking the code or the existing value in the current features street pre-direction field, and we're running a decode function, which is kind of like, if it's this, then return this. So in this case, if it's north, I want to return the value of N. If it's south, I want to return the value of S. And we're populating the legacy street pre-direction field with these values. So you can see the triggers we talked about. This is running on any insert or creation of a new point, and then it's also running on any update we make to any existing points. And there's another one here. It's doing the same thing, but it's populating the street type for the legacy field. So obviously this list is going to be a lot longer than the directional list, but it's kind of like easy to read here. If we look at alley is returning ALY, or avenue is returning AVE to the legacy field based on the next-gen 911 field's value. So another quick one, full road name calculation. This is a field we see in all the data sets. I think Wisconsin has a full street name field, but really it's just concatenating a list of fields here. So the pre-direction, the street name, the post type, and the post direction. Concatenating that all into one string and populating a field corresponding to that address point. And then, like we talked about, the NINA global ID, we can reference a sequence that we set up in the database to start at a given number and sequentially return those numbers as we insert or create new points. and then we can add a prefix and a suffix in between that number to give us that global ID that's part of the NINA schema. So, and just to kind of show how easy it is to create a new rule, I'm going to create a new rule that's populating the X and Y values like we talked about. So I've got the code here. This is as simple as it gets. It's a one-liner. We want to bring in the geometry of the feature and the X, or the longitude. So we'll give this a name called longitude calculation, if I could spell, and we'll say it populates long and the field. So then with calculations, we're always assigning a field. So we're going to go look in our list of fields here and see there's a field named long. And we want this to fire not only on any creation of a new point, but also if we move a point for some reason. And then we'll hit save. And so now we have this longitude calculation. And just to add one more, it's kind of the same thing, but it's going to be bringing in the latitude. So same thing, we'll kind of do this backwards. It doesn't matter what, you can change these. And we'll say latitude calculation. And again, just accessing the features geometry and returning the Y value or the latitude value. And we want this to run anytime we insert or update. So now we have these attribute rules assigned to our address points field. And we can go in here and see some of this in action. So I'll just pick one of these. Let's see, this point over here, it has some attributes. Let's see, maybe not that one. Let's check this one. Latitude calculation, okay. No value is supplied. Well, that's fine.
I think in the rule, the field wasn't in the rule.
Oh, geez, you're right. I skipped right over that. That's okay. Why you preload your rules. Here we go.
Also, that's why there are helpful errors for us.
Yeah, I didn't see an error. Okay, let's just go ahead and delete that out of here. So there should have been something, but anyway, we'll just do that one more time. And populate the field that we want. There we go. So again, we're just accessing the geometry of the feature, and you can see there's a list of arcade functions over here, but we just want whatever the geometry Y value is for this and make sure it's valid and hit OK. So now we see that, again, we can do this on any insert or update. So I will save this. And now we should be able to go back over here, and I will grab one of these. And we see this already has some longitude and latitude values. And it's got some legacy street type values and legacy street predirection. But if you remember, we changed these or created these to fire on update. So if I change this to east, you'll see that the legacy predirection responds to that change, reads what's in the street predirection field, and returns the corresponding E that we showed earlier. Same thing for the post type. Remember, one of the examples was avenue would return AVE. So we're seeing that happen live. And then there was also the full road name calculation, which is also happening here. You can see as we change this to something, we're not only getting this legacy street type to change, but the full road name field is also responding to that update. And same for the longitude and latitude. So if I went in here and moved this field, move this address point somewhere way over here, and then hit save. Now, when I go in and select this, it has, if we would have recorded the values, these longitude and latitude values have changed because it has moved to a different spot on the map. So this is just kind of the really basic, it's hard to just skim over the top here, but it just kind of shows how effective and useful some of these rules are, even at just the calculation type on a file geodatabase level. So with that, I will turn it back over to Aaron.
All right. And that's how I started. So before I had Hunter to branch version for me, we started with those, and they are a great place to start. Like I said, this is how they apply to 911, but you could use these in any workflow, and they're super helpful. So those were the first two types. So now we're going to talk more about batch calculation and validation. So batch calculation, similar to immediate calculation, they will automatically populate attributes. But and so these are similar. Anything that you use an immediate calculation for, you could batch calculate. But sometimes we don't need immediate calculation. So when we calculated the full road name, you want to see that immediately. You want to make sure that that works, because we're maybe using that in other rules. But there are some things like maybe ESN or unincorporated values that we want to make sure they're right, but we don't care if they happen immediately. We can save some of that processing time and do them all at once. So that's really why we would use these. So similar, ESN or incorporated municipality, but anything that you do an immediate calculation for, you could decide to batch calculate that. And this is where it gets a little bit different. It is triggered on demand using the error inspector. So if you have done topology, you're familiar with the error inspector. If not, it's just a window that you'll see in Hunter's demo that helps you interact with those dynamic layers. So it is better than the data reviewer window. So you'll see the difference here. And then again, you can save processing time while editing, because you can trigger that, maybe at the end of the day, you want to batch calculate all those. This is where Hunter's going to get into this a little bit, but this is where you have to jump a little bit. You got to be in at least Pro 2.6 and in a branch versioned enterprise geodatabase. And then you can only use these in Pro because branch versioning is only available in Pro. And that is why we would encourage everyone to go to Pro, because that's where, again, Esri is putting all their money in developing power. And the last one, and the most exciting one we want to talk about, are the validation rules. And we use these to perform quality assurance checks. So we have upwards of 50 total attribute rules that we're using. Most of them, I think, Hunter, I would say most of them are probably validation rules. Is that true?
Yeah, so we currently have 70 rules in action.
That's how fast it's moving.
Yes, it moves very fast. I think probably 45 of those are validation rules, and then there's some various calculation rules. And those are split between just our road center lines and our address point layers. So that just shows how much you can do with just 2 layers of data. Now they are heavily reliant on each other, and the most important for the auditing that we're doing currently. But there's, once you get rolling on these attribute rules, they just, if you're willing to put some time into learning Arcade, you can get really creative and do a lot and save yourself some potential headaches down the road.
Yes. As Hunter knows, I will come to him and say, hey, can we do this one too? And he's made them all happen. Yeah. So for road center lines, some of the things we may check are, does that full road name match the master street name table, which is a hijack of your MSAG, so that we can be consistent throughout the road center lines and the address points. Does your parity match your range? So we've got road ranges, low and high, that we can use to check against parity. And we'll talk a little bit more about this, but it will trigger an error if you've got odd numbers and then you say your parity is even. One that we added was that global ID must be unique. Obviously, we have the calculation rule that will make sure that it's unique, but if for some reason we got off by one, then this will alert us to whether or not we need to update one of those. In your road center lines, your from value must be less than your to value. And this is where validation rules are so useful. Sometimes that's not true, right? Sometimes you have a from value that is bigger than the to value. You want to know where those are so you can make sure that they're legitimate. And once they are, you could mark those as exceptions. But that's where we wouldn't want to necessarily make sure we've calculated all that. We just want to know if it's not true so we can fix it if necessary and mark it an exception if we need to. Similar with the ranges that don't overlap. So you want to make sure you don't have any overlapping there. Address points, same full road name. We're gonna check that full road name matches its closest center line. That those global IDs are unique, and another one that the ESN is correct. So we will look at the boundaries that address point lives in, and then compare that to the ESN and make sure that those numbers match.
And just before we leave this page, I think it's important to say that constraint rules and validation rules are only returning a value of true or false. So whereas calculation rules, whether immediate or batch, can return anything, concatenated full street names or, street types and things like that. But constraint and validation rules, in their nature, they are looking for, does it pass this test? Yes or no? True or false, and allowing things to happen after that. Now, validation rules are nice because they also return an error message, which helps clear up why was it false. But constraints, you get that same error message, but it's just kind of a uniqueness to these two types of rules and changes how you have to think about how would I make these checks.
Yep. And so again, like the batch calculation rules, these are triggered on demand with the error inspector. So you can make some edits like topology. You make your edits and then you trigger these checks. And this is green and highlighted in bold because this is where it's so useful, is that you get dynamic feedback while you're editing. You may update a range because of one error, and that may cause another error that you hadn't caught before. And that's just its power over Data Reviewer, where you wouldn't know that induced a new error in Data Reviewer unless you reran the whole thing. So that's just why this has been so useful for us. Similar, you need you need Pro 2.6 and it needs to be branch versioned, and it can only happen in Pro. So with that, we'll show the second demo.
All right, so and just to the last slide there, you need Pro 2.6 and Enterprise 10.7 or newer to use this side of the demo. So all right, so I will bring up, so we have another Pro project here. This one is not connected to a file geodatabase. This one is connected to an enterprise geodatabase feature layer, a set of feature layers that's hosted as a feature service in our enterprise. So it kind of leads into this whole, what do I need to get set up to use validation rules? Well, the most important thing, as we've said multiple times, it has to be in an enterprise database. So think of Microsoft SQL Server or Postgres, your two most common. And then it has to be branch version. So most of you are probably familiar with traditional versioning, which could have just been called versioning until branch version came along. Then we had to divide the two. So a lot of people are using traditional versioning, where you have a version, a child version, and then grandchildren that users are making edits to and pushing back up the chain. Branch versioning only allows one layer of versions below it. So you have the default version or the parent version, and then just a bunch of child versions for your users or your editors. And really, it's important that, we need this branch versioning, and we're harping on how important ArcGIS Pro is, and that Esri's pushing everything towards that. And that kind of leads into branch versioning is only available and can only be done using ArcGIS Pro. So it's not something you can do in ArcMap or ArcCatalog. Also makes your data unusable in those two programs. So it's kind of like once you leap, you got to go. It's got to be in Pro. So do that. The versioning, the enterprise database, version that database as branched. And then you have to have a few other things. You have to have global IDs on all of your data, tables and layers. You have to also have editor tracking on. And then once those are complete, you can register the data layers, the feature layers, or the tables as branch versioned, which then gets you to the final point of allowing you to add validation type rules to that data. So, it's kind of this big lead in to just get us here, but it's really important that we don't try to sell short the work that goes into getting to this point. It can be a little confusing, but it is doable. If we can do it, then I have faith in all of you. But so to see it all in action, right? So that's the lead in. Now let's see what this looks like when you have this hosted feature service with validation rules. So we have our map here. We've connected to data that's hosted in our portal. We've created it in a map. And now we want to, start for us this evaluation of the rules. So we have all these rules. We want to see where are the errors in our data. So we've got some address points here and some road center lines. And the road center line data is in the blue. Monroe Street, it's got some left to right values. The arrows show which way the road is drawn into this intersection. So just a background. So now we've got this data and we need to bring in the famous error inspector. So this is, if you've done topology, you kind of know what this looks like. There's a little window over here and some fields. So we're going to evaluate, and I should probably real quick just show that there are indeed rules on this data and not just calculation rules, which we do have a few, but there's some validation rules. So we're looking for things like an address number cannot be null or zero. We're also looking at for an address number that's within the range of its corresponding road center line. And we're looking for the potential place or two address points that are within 5 feet of each other. That's something that could be okay, and we would mark as an exception, but we want to make sure that we know it's out there and investigate for ourselves. And then on road center lines here, if we go to design and attribute rules, we can see that it also has some calculation rules, but it's also got 3 validation rules. So kind of like address points, a very simple one, the street name cannot be null or blank. And then we have some parity checks. So the left parity and the right parity must match the range in the road. So if the left side of the road is 2 even numbers, then the parity has to be even. Otherwise, if they're even and the parity says odd, we're going to get an error. And no, that's something that we need to check or either mark as an exception if it is, something that we've deemed is okay. So that's the back end. Now this is the user interface in Pro. It's nice, it's pretty, a lot of buttons, a lot of colors. So in the error inspector, we're going to skip the calculation for now. And we're just going to run the validation rules that are attached to these feature layers. And we're going to run it on the visible extent. So we just want to focus on this right now. And so I'm going to click evaluate. We're going to get some visual feedback that it's running. We're going to give it a few seconds to check all of these points, all of these road center lines for the errors. And again, it's returning these validation rules. It's doing a true false check. So it's going to run through them all. If it's true, skip. If it's false, which it appears we have some false returns here, which would raise these errors. So we can minimize, and in here we get this feedback. So we see there's 3 errors in this area here. And it looks like one is that the address number cannot be null or zero. Okay, So now this turns yellow. We're looking at this. So indeed, 0 Sycamore is the data associated with this address point. So we need to fix that. It's probably not supposed to be a 0. And then we have another one, error code 107, the road center line. So there's no road center line within 2,500 feet of this address point that has a range allowing for 0 and a Sycamore street. So that makes sense because we can see here the nearest street that it'd be associated to has a range of 501 to 599 on the left and 500 to 598 on the right. So we would assume this 0 needs to be somewhere in this range. And then we have one, error code 204, which means it's associated to the road center lines. The parity value does not match given the to from right value. So we'll start at the top here. 0. All right, so I'm going to select that. I'm going to go over here to the attributes. I'm going to choose this address point, and I'm going to see, all right, North Sycamore Street, 0. Well, you know what? I did some quick research, and this needs to be, I think I looked it up, and it was 501. I'm going to hit apply. Okay, so I've made that. And now there was this other error. Okay, so I'm thinking that because it's 501, I can see it's within the range on the left side of the road here. So that should clear up that one too. Now this, I'm going to select this road and these two errors. And we're seeing that there's a couple errors here. So the parity, okay, so we're having a parity issue. Well, on the left, we see 501 to 599, so the left parity would be odd. And on the right, we're seeing 500 to 598. So we know that means the parity on the right should be even. Well, you can see here it says that it's odd, so we just need to make a quick change here and apply that. And save our edits, which is done. I'm going to clear my selections. And so now in the workflow, we've made our changes, we've addressed these errors, and I'm going to reevaluate and get that dynamic feedback that you don't get from some of these other workflows. So let's go ahead and run this and see, did we clear these errors or not with our edits? And give it a few seconds here. And in theory, these pink this pink line and this pink dot over the address points should go away, and they did. So we can see just how effective these rules are, giving the editor or the user that immediate feedback instead of having to go start a whole new edit session, a whole new reviewer session, just to check did these 3 changes I just made actually fix something or not. So it's a skim off the top of what we are doing here and what you can do if you harness all that attribute rules have, especially with the validation side of things. But hopefully that kind of piques your interest into some 911 workflows and just kind of shows the power at the very, very basic level that these have. So yeah.
Sorry, I wanted to reiterate that you did a great job editing, but if he had made a mistake, if he had called that, 401 Sycamore, then we would still have some errors. So that is, for me, one of the biggest, the reason it's worth the effort to get into this is that you don't just fix the errors in front of you, you prevent errors from happening. And so that makes it worth all the heartache.
Yeah, and Aaron has a good point. If I would have put 401 instead of 501, that error would have still been on that address point. So it kind of allows you to work through these and not just, one chance to fix it all and then wait and see, a day later if you've fixed all the ones or not. So we could probably talk for a long time about all this stuff, but we will try to wrap it up here. So that is the demo for me, and I will turn it back over to Aaron.
Okay.
Oops. If I can show the PowerPoint. All right.
Okay. So yeah, this is, if we were live, we'd ask you guys if you had any questions, but since we're not, we will just walk you through sort of a review of when you can use these, right? So if you found something, I really want to do that, I want you to walk away to knowing, hey, I can do that now, or I need to talk to somebody to get me some help so I can do it in the future. So those immediate calculation and constraints you can do throughout, as long as you have a file geodatabase and you're using Pro at least 2.3, again, 2.7 is where you should start. You can leverage all of that we talked about in the first half. The second half, the batch calculation, the validation, you need to be branch versioned, and in Enterprise 10.7, Pro at least 2.6. And then I'm gonna let Hunch talk about this, but so we didn't really touch on, I mean, a little bit, all the work that it takes to get it there. So, you start with a file geodatabase. For some of our clients, we export a file geodatabase because that's what they want at the end, but in the middle, we use all these things. So, Hunter, I don't know if you want to.
Yeah, I mean, so I kind of went over the branched versioning side just to get to be able to add validation rules, but it's actually a lot more than that. So like for us in the workflow that we developed to kind of get started 6 months ago, we took our file geodatabase workflows that we were using and we converted those and put them into, we use Postgres. We have enterprise databases that live in Postgres and on one of our servers. And then we did all of the things we need to do, right? So we created the connection in Pro, then we created a branch version connection, and then we have the feature data sets of all of the required layers of address points and roads and all of the other data. There's, all the feature layers and tables that come with an NG911 schema. Then you have to go in and add global IDs to all of those. That's how the editor tracking comes into play for all this stuff. And so yeah, global IDs, then enable editor tracking. That's how branch versioning keeps track of what's going on between all these versions. And then you can register all these feature data sets or individual layers or tables as versioned. And then you get to the middle point here where you can start, you've gone through all this and now you have to learn Arcade because you have to write validation rules and attach them and see, do they work? Are they, do they need edits? Do I have everything right? And that's where I spent months scratching my head, but it slowly but surely came together. And then when you get this all put together, then you get to publish the ArcGIS Pro map that you have as a feature service with all of these layers and tables, send that to the portal, and then your users or editors can start to harness all of that data with validation rules and calculation rules, constraint rules in Pro on their own, local Pro documents, and start doing all of the editing and analysis and things that we need to do to, for us to clean up this data and make sure it's good to go for our clients. And this is what you would do if you were doing it on your own. It's just a lot to get going, but once you get there, then you saw it's so easy to start using it and seeing where are the errors and fixing those errors, and did I fix them correctly? Did they pass? Did they fail? And that's like this middle part we don't even have in between, like publishing and exporting to a file geodatabase is like all the fun stuff where you get to use all this cool stuff you put together. And then at the end, we do exports to a file geodatabase. And sometimes that's backing up our data. Other times it's to send to the state or send to our client. So yeah, I mean, that's kind of in a nutshell. Quickly, I can summarize what we're doing here, but and we have this circle around the middle part. Like if you need help, you have questions or want guidance, or you say, I just want someone to get me to that point where in between publishing the data and exporting it, I want someone to get me to that point where I can do the editing and have my users do the editing. That's where we can really be of service to you, because we've navigated these muddy waters and we have all of the workflow put together. So I'll stop rambling, but it's exciting stuff. It's so useful. It's so new and just it works well for what we're doing, especially with 911 data.
Yep. And I want to reiterate that it is new. So we have run into some things that we have had to ask Esri about, and they don't quite have an answer yet. So we see that this as they develop it more, will become more and more user friendly. I think that error inspector table will become more useful too, with the ways you can filter through the errors that are there. So, I mean, I think we've just gotten to the beginning of where things are going. And if you can't tell, we're very excited about it. So thanks for listening. I've got Hunter's email, my email there. If you don't remember that, you can email us at ng911@cloudpointgeo.com or check out our website. But thanks so much for your time. And I can't wait to hear how you're using attribute rules.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.